Everyone. Great to see everyone. Many people in person today, but welcome to those who are joining virtually. I'd like to go ahead and call the Graduate Medical Education Board meeting to call it to order. And Lucas, do you mind taking roll?
Yes. All right. Dr. Jennifer Choi.
Hi.
Dr. Becker.
Here.
Dr. Knight. Here. Mike Pending. Dr. Shockley.
Here.
Angie Zagel.
Here.
Dr. Gepke. Present. Rob McClin.
Yes.
Dr. Greist.
Here.
Dr. Hearn.
Here.
Then Kelly Collick.
Here.
All right. And Eric Davis.
Here.
Yep. Quorum.
Okay.
All right.
Welcome. We have some public members. I'll just mention that I have a resident working with me this month on a leadership elective. Elise Oni is here as a third year resident from Dr. Shockley's program. So good to have you. All right. Well, let's go ahead and so we're at quorum, you said, Lucas. Okay, wonderful. And then let's go ahead and review the minutes from our last meeting, January 24th. If there's any corrections or additions, clarifications, let us know. If not, we'll entertain our motion. For the minutes. Second. All right, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved from our prior meeting. Well, we have a great meeting today. We're going to have a lot of great discussion. We're thrilled to have some guests here from the Bowen Center. I'll introduce them in a second. And then we have a couple of grants to score. And, you know, I think we have a lively discussion probably around just the overall climate and the legislative updates and the things that are occurring from that front as well, and how that impacts our direction as a board. So really looking forward to today's meeting. But first off, I want to welcome Hannah Maxey, the director of the Bowen Center for Health Workforce Research and Policy at the IU School of Medicine. And she has a presentation to share with us today from her and her team around the pipeline of physicians in Indiana. I think will be enlightening for our work as a board as we collaborate and work together going forward.
Wonderful, great. If it's okay, I'll stand up because that way I can see everyone in the room. I am excited to be here with you today. I don't want to assume that everybody knows what the Bowen Center is, so I want to take 1 minute and just make sure you're aware of it. We are a academic research center that is housed within the School of Medicine in the Department of Family Medicine. Now, you may have heard of the Bowen Research Center. That's been around since the 90s, obviously named in honor of, our late beloved doctor and former governor, Otis Bowen. But in 2015, the Bowen Research Center was formally renamed and approved by the dean to become the Bowen Center for Health Workforce Research and Policy. Our center, as it is now, the Bowen Center, works very closely with state government, providing expert technical assistance for healthcare workforce data collection, reporting, analysis, policy research, technical assistance. We work across executive branch agencies providing technical assistance and support, and we take ad hoc requests from the legislature as well. In addition to all of our work with state government, we do external projects, and we have a number of research grants and sponsored projects, all of which are focused on healthcare workforce evaluations or policy related research. So really excited to be here with you today. The study that I'll be sharing with you all was a study that we did for the state of Indiana, specifically for the Department of Health and the Health Workforce Council there. We have Brooke Mullen, Executive Director of that council, here with us today as well. So the Bowen Center was requested to do an analysis of Indiana's medical education pipeline to practice to inform discussions that were going on specifically related to certain specialties that we generally would consider primary care if we use the federal government's definition. So those were family medicine, pediatrics, general pediatrics, and obstetrics gynecology. So, you guys are the experts, but I just did want to set up front the results that I'm going to be sharing with you today and kind of the policy research, it is focused when we say medical education pipeline to practice. The study did include looking at our undergraduate medical education environment and our in-state retention of our medical graduate talent. And then as a second phase, looked at our in-state retention of our medical resident talent in the state of Indiana, obviously looking at the ultimate outcome being practicing physicians in the state of Indiana. So the study originally was very focused on family medicine, peds, and OB-GYN. And you may have seen, we're happy to make sure you get the links. You may have seen the full technical report where we lay out the methodologies, the data sources, and we did a deep dive into family medicine, pediatrics, and OB-GYN. That we did in partnership with Marian and Indiana University School of Medicine. And we also actually did key informant interviews with every residency program director or team that was willing to connect. We sent invitations to all residency programs in the state for those specialty areas as part of the large scale summary, and those are all found in the technical report. So the technical report very focused on those specialties. In policy discussions, once we started translating our findings, right, from what we found from our deep dive into family medicine, OB-GYN, and peds, the question came back to us. Well, okay, that's nice, but how do we compare? Because where are we falling behind? Where are we ahead to help inform policy decision making? So that led us to prepare a companion report that was Indiana's physician pipeline to practice in context. That report is broad. So it isn't the deep dive into family medicine. It isn't the deep dive into specialties. It looks more broadly at our pipeline to practice for physicians and how we compare to our neighboring states and to the nation with regards to our pipeline. Most recently, to make sure that there was really quick information available, especially to inform discussions during the legislative session as we were nearing close, our team put together a one-pager, which I believe was shared with you all or should be in front of you. And that was just a quick snapshot of the findings from these reports to make sure that there was some objective information that was available and documented to individuals that were having policy-related discussions. So I am going to spend only one slide talking about our very deep dive into family medicine, pediatrics, and OB-GYN, because I really want to spend the majority of the time sharing the results on the in context, how we compare, okay? This slide is looking at our residency positions in the state of Indiana. So these are the bars, and I apologize, I know in the back it's probably small. This is looking at 2019, 2020, 21, all the way to 2024. And it is looking at, the first bar is family medicine, the middle is OB-GYN, and the farthest one in each year is pediatrics. You don't need to be able to read the legend at the bottom. The dark blue at the bottom are residency slots that were filled with Indiana medical graduates, either IU or Marian. The light blue are filled with students from other programs, okay, not Indiana. The gray are slots that were not matched at match day, okay? So you can see basically the trends, but the takeaway is, from what we found, if every single medical student that graduates, that goes into family medicine from both Marian and IU, stayed here in state in Indiana, we would not even fill all of our family medicine slots as a state. And so you can see here what the distribution is and what share Indiana medical graduates account for in matching to our slots here at state. OB-GYN and peds, you can see those ratios there. Relatively very few, these are count data. Relatively very few of our OB-GYN or pediatric residents were our Indiana medical grads. So we aren't retaining them into those residencies. This is just a high level. I would encourage you, if you are interested, to please read the report. It goes in detail into a lot of different things, but I wanted to make sure that we had a lot of time for the discussion on the in context. Do you all have any questions about these data? Before we go on? Okay.
Yeah, one
Yes.
quick question. So for 2024 in family medicine, did those positions remain unfilled after the SOAP process?
No, they were filled after so, but this was looking at the match, which is why I wanted to make sure I said this was at match. Yes.
Any idea on the lighter blue group, how many of those are people that went to school out of state but are from Indiana?
No, that would be a really great data point to be able to explore, but that is not something that we had access to. And I do want to share that we are very grateful for collaboration and partnership from both Marion and IU because they both collaborated and provided data to help support this. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about the in context. Okay, and this is going to now we're switching. Everything I was talking about before was Indiana-based data. We worked with our Indiana institutions to get specific data points on specialties. But now what we're going to talk about is more nationally reported data because we want to see how we compare. And so we need to look to the data sources like WMC and RMP that are available across the board so that we can understand our environment in context to the national environment. So number one, when we're talking about undergraduate medical education, and you guys are the experts, so I'm just going to share with you. I know that up front. The first thing when we're looking in context is how many actual medical programs or schools do we have as a state? What do our contiguous states look like? And so, I mean, obviously we know Indiana, we only have 2. We are very small with number of programs as compared to our neighboring states. So then we need to look at enrollment. How do we actually compare looking at the enrollment number of medical students? So even though we have only 2 medical programs at the state level, we actually do have they're larger programs, as the IU program is very large. So although we fall behind Kentucky with our schools or medical colleges, we are ahead. We still, however, fall very far behind enrollment in our other neighboring states, with the exception of Kentucky. Now, this is not sufficient to actually be able to compare our standing to the national or to our neighbors. So what we've done is we've adjusted medical student enrollment to population across the states and nationally. And so this is the number of medical students adjusted per population using 100,000 population, very common workforce ratio metric that's used. And you can see that we still fall, even though we do have IU, which is a very large medical school with a large enrollment count. We still fall very far behind the majority of our other states and behind the national average medical student per population, with the exception of Kentucky. So this is putting our undergraduate capacity in context. Never fear, it is not all doom and gloom though, because if we train them, we can apparently retain them. And so what you're looking at is AAMC reported data on the percent of physicians retained from medical school. And so you can see here, this is Indiana, our neighboring states, and the national average. In Indiana in 2023, AAMC reported that we actually retained approximately 50% of the physicians that we trained in our medical programs. So this is actually higher than all of our neighboring states and significantly higher than the national average. So this suggests that when we have students that come here from wherever, or we raise them and they go into our medical schools, that we are better at keeping them in Indiana. So that is really great news. And we're actually doing better at that than our neighbors and than the national average. So those are the findings in context for undergraduate medical education. I want to switch gears and talk about GME, which is what you are all here to talk about today. And we're going to put this into context. So graduate medical education, this again, now we're looking at just the raw number of residency training programs, okay? And so you can see here, Indiana has 151 residency programs. We fall behind all of our contiguous states, including the state of Kentucky, in the number of residency programs that we have at the state level. We want to, again, though, look at the total number of residents because programs don't necessarily equate to the realized capacity. And so when we look at our actual number of medical residents, you can see, yes, we are very far behind everyone except Kentucky. And we've been neck and neck with Kentucky, but you'll note that we've actually started to increase above Kentucky over the last few years. And I would argue that's probably some of our investments that we've made into GME expansion. But regardless, we fall very far behind. So now let's go ahead and adjust that per population. Okay, because I think that is important. Yes.
And this is just residents, not fellows.
This is residents, not fellows.
Thank you.
That is correct. Thank you. So now we're going to again adjust that information for population. Okay. And so again, this is now we're looking at the medical residents adjusted for population, using it, looking at the residents per 100,000 people. Okay. Basically, we fall very far behind all of our neighboring states and extremely far behind also the national average with regards to our graduate medical education resident capacity for our population. This signals a dire need for additional and expanded and targeted investments. We are able to retain, based on the data, strategic and targeted investments at significant amounts are needed to grow the workforce. So again, I shared it's not all doom and gloom. We train them, we retain them. This is now looking at the combination of physician retention from residency and medical school combined. I'm sorry again in the back that you cannot see these very clearly. But the national average for in-state retention that's reported from the AAMC is hovering around 48% of residents stay where they train or do residency. And then medical school and residency combined, the national average is approximately 68% in-state retention. Indiana falls above those, both of those metrics, with 53% retention of our talent graduating from our residencies in state and 78% total retention from our pipeline. And you can see that that is higher than all of our contiguous states. So training, the education pipeline is where we need to target a lot of our investment in order to build and grow our workforce. So talking about investments, I thought it would be a good idea, since I was coming to you all today, just to share what we have in the reports with regards to investments. We were grateful for the collaboration with Lucas and the GME board, that they provided information and data from the investments that have been made by the board since board inception. And I thought we'd take a moment. I know you all have celebrated that, but we have made some significant investment as a state in expanding our residency education capacity, specifically approximately $45 million since inception, leading to 592 contracted residents. So we are working to build our education pipeline through GME funding and investments, but we still fall very far behind the national average, and our states that are neighboring us that are competing for our talent, especially in the residency programs that share borders with some of our neighboring states. So what you're looking at now is one of the things that we heard, I shared with you that as part of our deep dive technical report, I got to meet with residency program directors from across the state and ask them what they're experiencing, what they think the opportunities are with expansion of programs and with retention of their residents post-residency. One of the things that we heard from residency program directors, especially those whose programs were located in border counties to our neighboring states, that some of our top talent is getting cherry picked by our neighbors because they are being enticed with significant incentives from across the border. And so part of what our team did was a policy analysis and research into what do those investments look like from other states. Now, I want to share with you what is on this. There are two separate what we call loan repayment programs, incentive programs. I apologize if you are all familiar with this. There is an opportunity for states to participate in a federal match loan repayment program. That is called the National Health Service Corps State Loan Repayment Program. That program is competitive, available to states. States are required to come up with matching funds to match the federal investment to run the program. And so what you're looking at on the top is federal match for the National Health Service Corps State Loan Repayment Program. All of our neighboring states, with the exception of Ohio, currently operate a federal match loan repayment program. What I want to call attention to is that although it's a federal match and it must be run under federal guidelines, meaning only certain medical specialties qualify, and individual practitioners, clinicians, and physicians must be working in and practicing in specific communities under specific guidance, such as they may not limit or restrict the number of Medicaid recipients that they serve, and they must offer a federally based sliding fee scale in order to qualify for this program. But states have the opportunity within the program to do their own design, to put proprietary, I guess, information and juice into it in how they design their program to make them more competitive. What I want to call attention to is in Indiana, our federal match program offers up to $80,000 over 4 years, $20,000 per year. Our max is $80,000 in our federal match. Our neighbors offer significantly more. So Illinois offers up to $100,000 for 4 years or $25,000 per year. And when you go to Kentucky and Michigan, they offer $300,000 max in 6 years. Now, Indiana has the discretion to design this program and actually create the parameters for this program and the funding amounts. So we fall far behind on the way we have designed and are administering our federal match program. In addition to federal match programs, many states develop state sovereign or fully state-run programs for incentives offering loan repayment. And so that's what you're looking at on the lower bar. These are state-run programs. These programs are developed in statute and are funded with either directed state appropriations or through funds that are established within the state, where there may be state funds deposited, as well as philanthropic funds, employer funds, etc., to tap into these funds. Indiana does not currently have any state-run loan repayment program or initiative. All of our neighboring states have state-run programs. And when we're looking at those programs, all of them, all of those that are available for physicians are offering more than $100,000 max toward loan repayment. And in some cases, so for example, in Kentucky, it's $300,000 for their state-run program, in addition to their federal match. Now, their state-run program, they get to fully design and implement. Meaning, if they need to do general surgeons in rural communities, they can target general surgeons in rural communities. You cannot do that with the federal match program. So in the state of Indiana, we are behind on our federal match. We aren't competitive with our neighboring states that operate the federal match loan repayment. And we do not have any strategy at the state level or any investments at the state level to target our own prioritization for physician workforce recruitment and investment. So we thought that this was important to share with you all today because yes, if we train them, we can retain them, but we know that students are coming out with significant debt loads. And if you're training in St. Joe County up in South Bend, and you can quite simply work in Kalamazoo, and you can get $300,000 erased for 6 years in Kalamazoo versus $80,000 in Indiana, that's a hard sell to keep them here if they need to do that.
Yeah, now what body is coordinating that federal match program here in Indiana? I don't know.
That is the State Office of Primary Care at the Department of Health.
Okay.
Yep. So I just have a few take-it homes for you all, and I think I am on time and on target. Obviously, I've said all of these things. If we train them, we can retain them. GME expansion, it has to be a top priority for physician workforce development in the state of Indiana. Opportunities exist right now to make our retention incentives more competitive. We have the opportunity to make them more competitive right now, but I think we also have the opportunity to discuss strategic development of our own incentives that could use state investment, but could be strategically designed to enable employers to support those investments or philanthropic organizations as well. I think I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but strategic, intentional, and data-driven planning is needed to strengthen our medical education pipeline to practice. And so I am going to open it up now. I'm happy to take any questions about the study, anything that you all would like to discuss. So.
Great information. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah,
Comments?
Hannah, online.
Hi.
Can you hear
we
me?
Can hear you. We
Yeah,
can hear
hi,
you.
Hannah. This is Steve Becker. How are you? Great data. Very similar to 10 years ago, we had Trip Umbach when we were starting down in Evansville do a similar sort of study for our state. And really, they found almost the exact same data. If we train them, we keep them. At that time, the only residency spots per population that were even near the midpoint of the country was family medicine. Did you look at, or do you have this data in terms of the number of residency spots in different specialties comparing us to surrounding states and national average? Because as we try to figure out how we spend funds going forward, we're going to have to start targeting, I think, some key areas that we need. So I'm just curious if that data, if you have it, or it doesn't look like you really looked at that particularly in this study.
Thank you so much for asking. And it's great to see you again, Dr. Becker. This study was, just to be very frank with you all, this study was turned around in 5 months for the Department of Health. The Bowen Center has the capacity. We would have access to the data to do a deep dive into specialty, but obviously there are a lot of medical specialties. And so this study was basically, the in context was limited to looking globally. There would need to be probably a more targeted and longer duration study that would either prioritize other certain specialties, or that would be statewide for all specialties. I think, to be quite frank, I think that type of study is needed to really inform our investments.
I'll just say, actually, the AAMC workforce data actually has it divided by specialty, and so that's accessible. And we're behind in literally every specialty. So if you look at us, we're 25 per 100,000, and Michigan is 75 per 100,000. You can only imagine that we're behind in literally almost everything. So.
Is from a time, I'm sorry. Are you all right if we share these slides via email or on the website?
Yes, absolutely.
From a timing perspective on completion of this, were you able to share this with the legislators with administration?
Yes, we were. So the original, yeah.
The feedback?
So let me just share with you, we shared these through dissemination. I'm just gonna speak very frankly, my personal engagement with the legislature is generally only at the request of legislators who are requesting information. This was a study that we prepared for the Department of Health, and we disseminated it broadly with these resources being available to any that might need to advocate. I do personally engage in educating legislators, but I was not requested to do any education with legislators on this topic during this legislative cycle.
And it was shared with legislators. In fact, that was kind of the impetus for the one pager was we needed this to be really fast and really concise. I'm sure Greg will talk about it. It was just a gnarly last month, so. Just from the perspective of the students that we retain from Indiana, from the way that we talk about it, I guess I just want to emphasize that it's not all bad that we don't keep all Indiana students. And some of that kind of came out was like, we only have this number of students from Indiana, and that's actually not a bad thing. I think it's important for us to recruit some from Indiana. Not all of our IU and Marion students actually want to stay in Indiana for one thing. But also it's important for us to get some ideas from outside and some blood from outside and bring in some mix. I think it is important that we retain our graduates and even our students that go out. We want new ideas to come back to Indiana. And so we want them to go out and come back. And we also see that happens. I think that some of our state data might show that as well, some licensure data and some things. So at IU, we're working to actually collect information about when our residents come, where did you go to high school? What was your county of high school? Like, where do you claim to be from? Just so we can get that and figuring out where people are going afterwards. So we have a better sense of it. I think some of it, we don't actually know where our graduates are going and where exactly we're losing our people to. It looks like we're losing them potentially around the state, but even in our specialty care areas, it's hard to know exactly where we're losing. Also, we don't know if people are coming back after they do fellowships and things like that. I do think people do recognize Indiana as a really good state to practice in. So they do establish relationships and things like that. And we do have a lot of Indiana connections that will come back to where their families are. So we also find if we can marry them sometimes. They have two places where their families might exist and they might present. So, so I think that's important. It's just from a context standpoint as we present the data. I think it's important that number one, the match does what the match does. Not all Indiana students want to stay here, and we need to have an influx of lots of ideas. So
I will share one of the things that is in the technical report. I obviously didn't have time to go through all of the findings. We worked with the professional licensing agency on an exploration of using the basically medical intern, the residency permits, and matching that to full medical practice licenses and tracking those resident permits all the way out for over a decade into ongoing practice and self-reported actual active medical practice in the state of Indiana versus just maintaining a medical license. When we looked at that, there were many limitations. We're still exploring the use of that secondary data to develop actually an ongoing tracking system for how many residents we actually are actively retaining into practice, but the number was lower than some of the other data that are reported. So you can stay tuned for that. We are trying to see if that can kind of be, we have to remove fellows, fellowship. You have to remove individuals that are in a residency program somewhere else but are coming here for a rotation or a certain part of their training. But there are existing data within our state data warehouses. And because residents require regulatory permit and licensure to practice, we can actually track that as a state as long as we can start earmarking it at the time that the credential or the license is administered appropriately. That is all outlined in the technical report and the use of that data. The other thing I wanted to share is something that I've actually only more recently become aware of because I have been involved as just a research expert in national conversations is regarding NRMP exemptions. And so it appears that some states, when they're looking at expanding their GME capacity, they're actually specifically seeking NRMP exemption, so match exemption for specific slots in specific areas. So letting students actually apparently just decide that they would like to pursue that. Yeah, and so some states, including Wisconsin, are using that strategy and offering, if a graduate would like to stay, that they can stay there. So I didn't know if that's something that you all have ever talked about.
Maybe part of the rural track program in Wisconsin. I know they have a really active rural process.
Yep.
Some rural track programs in multiple specialties even. I don't know enough about the difference between the exemptions and the all-in policy. So the NRP has a very strict all-in policy, so I don't know where they differentiate that. Sometimes you can designate a track. So, if internal medicine has a rural track, you separate out 2 spots, the rural track position, and you might give your applicants to that almost a guarantee. But I don't know that you can, I don't know how you guarantee that students. Grace, do you have any other ideas on that?
No, I do not have any experience.
That gives me hard time. I'm not gonna say it.
Rachel?
You imagine if we hadn't done the work that we've done here over the last few years, how much of a even bigger goal? I mean, it was dire looking. We hadn't added the numbers that we had, this would have been beyond words. But we all are aware of the tightness of budget, what happened this year in the legislative process, the huge $2 billion shortfall. How do we, as Dr. Becker said, target this, get strategic? I mean, we have to be really strategic in this, and our budget is not expanding. And I think we're lucky we have what we have, but that's not going to be enough to fix this problem. What do we do strategically? It has to be strategic in what we do. And to the other thing that I mentioned earlier about knowing where people are from, I know for family medicine, we do a graduate exit survey, and the Bone Center does that for us. I don't know if that's all specialty that's done for, but are there questions within that? I think there are, to ask where you're from, to at least to get a little more data about. That's good to know. But I do agree, we do need some cross pollination of ideas. We're just all in
Right,
the
100% retention is not the goal.
That's not.
But yeah, these are good questions. And the comment you're making about the climate, we're gonna get into that. I think it's gonna be a robust discussion around that today. It's really difficult right now. There's a lot of headwinds, but and this is super important, and we're so far behind other states that we must be continuing to try all avenues. Dr. Neighbor.
Yeah, a couple of things. First, thanks for pointing out the retention aspect of this, because I think that we talk a lot about building new training, but retention, and from that family medicine study, I believe we've seen retention within family medicine fall from like 72% to 55% over the last 10 years. So, so retention is showing an issue. The other thing, do we need to take a step back and look at why GME is important, right? To address workforce issues, and then again, identify which specialties in Indiana we do need to be focusing on. I worry if we say, like the one slide talks about, well, we've got more family medicine slots than there is student interest in family medicine. But if the data shows we need more family physicians, I don't feel like we should back off of that strategy because there's student interest. Then we need to continue to figure out how you generate more student interest in going into the specialties that we really need. Not say, well, we're not going to train this many because there is an interest in it. Because if we did that, then we'd be training a whole lot of orthopedic surgeons, dermatologists, plastic surgeons, which there's shortage of those as well. But it feels like it's taking a step back and just maybe again looking at my specialty in Indiana. What do we need so that as we are adding more GME, it's to address those specific specialties, and that I don't remember seeing recently, but I'm sure it's out there by specialty.
Yeah, if you go to the workforce, WMC is physician workforce data dashboard.
And I'm really intrigued by the loan repayment and so forth, because primary care, you know, the guy that goes in derm and the guy that goes in the family vet comes out with the same amount of loans, probably from medical school, because they were at the same spot. And so that primary care guy needs more loan repayment, and maybe that's at least where we help primary care guy, 'cause we need all of it. I mean, we need everything.
So, and I guess what I would suggest is what's missing from this that directly ties to what you're talking about is actually the assessment of our current physician workforce to actually say, these are explicitly our gaps, and this is where we need to invest. Because our pipeline data is our pipeline data. That's who we're developing. What we really need to have is a very solid picture of what specific specialties do we need? Where do we explicitly need them? Where are we currently training? Where are the gaps? And then fill those gaps. And so that wasn't the purpose of this exercise, but that's actually not, and that is not something, that's something we do have here at the state level. That's literally what the Bowen Center has been reporting on. And we have dashboards that are available to the GME board where you can look by specialty across the counties, see the capacity and the FTE. We really need to have a statewide physician workforce assessment by specialty to identify what are our very targeted physician workforce needs within local communities, so that then our education investments are aligning with that.
Yeah. Just a quick question on those incentive programs. What's the scale of those? Because although they're impact, they describe really wonderful program packages for these residents who are graduating and going into practice. If they're only funding, 20 people, is that really what the barrier is, or do we have other barriers that are more important for us to tackle?
I can tell you that currently, and I'm sorry, I do not remember the number exactly, but it is in the 20s. So our program, the IDOH that we are doing student loan repayment, is a cohort of like 20 some.
For our state.
For
But for the other states, the impacts, you don't know how big their programs are, how far reaching they are.
And I mean, that's something that we could drill into,
Yeah.
but that was outside of the scope.
Yeah,
of
no, I
the-
totally
yeah,
understand.
the
Just
policy,
kind
yeah.
of curious, because it may be a small fraction of the physicians in those states who are getting attracted by those packages.
And our program at IDOH that uses those federal match programs, it's not just physician. It's, mental health professionals, it's RN, it's various, like it's kind of all.
So you're saying that 20's not even all physicians?
No,
Invariably, what occurs then, our hospitals are forced in the state of Indiana to negotiate within the employment contract.
Yeah.
Those type of repayments significantly higher than what others would have.
Correct.
Because they're getting some state support.
Yeah.
We're getting none.
Yeah.
So that makes it even more difficult from a competitive standpoint for hospitals in the state of Indiana, especially rural hospitals. They're competitive enough to crack that kind of town. So it's a slippery slope without getting some help.
Thank you, Sable.
Oh, thanks, Angie. Sorry, didn't see your hand. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, a great report to share. I'm gonna dive deeper into the data. We, as a FQHC, we do use the National Health Service Corps student loan repayment system. It's not appearing to be very attractive as we're trying to recruit for medical doctors. I do think if there's an area that we could focus on, that would be great to see if, and it might gain some traction. Our association, we've kind of heard that there's a few professions that Governor Braun loves, and one of them is doctors. So I think getting this message could be, something well received by the current administration. I know he's got issues with the healthcare system, but apparently doctors is one of his favorite professions. And so talking about especially if you align, the student loan payment programs for his desire to go into the OB deserts. I think that's something that might be easier to advocate for than what might first seem at this point, because the data shows if there's opportunities for us to retain even more. But just so you know, like for us, that National Health Service Corps works for the dental community. Like I'm able to hire dentists from it, but the number is not big enough for us to attract the medical docs. I love to see us closer to the other states.
And so, my colleague, Michaela Tobin, who's with me today, just pulled up Michigan. Michigan reports, funding hundreds of positions under their loan repayment program that's sovereign to their state at $300,000 for 6 years. So I think we're not talking about $5 million of investment. We're talking about many millions of dollars of investment to retain.
Yeah.
Which is why our residency program directors up in Northern Indiana are saying we are losing talent straight up into Michigan. They're getting sucked up into Michigan.
Yeah.
So I think, are there any other questions? But I know you need to move on.
Yeah,
so.
we're around the time. Any last questions or comments? And anything that, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, loan repayment may become more attractive right now as public service loan forgiveness gets very shaky on the national level. And so I think students are gonna be scrambling for things. I have residents right now that are in complete awful limbo right now of calling every 2 months to get their forbearance as their interest is accumulating. It is not pretty for residents right now.
And this is only, I know I'm out of time. Loan repayment is only one type of incentive. There are other strategies that states can implement, so.
And depending on what happens to plus loans.
Yeah.
It may become a much bigger deal.
Yeah.
If the plus loan limits are lowered significantly.
Yes.
The
Anything
other
that
thing
you- Oh, go ahead, Angie.
The other thing I was going to add, if I'm thinking about the barriers and why it's not as attractive, is because even with the National Health Service Corps, we can't guarantee the student loan repayment will be there at the time we're trying to sign a physician. So if there's a way for the residents to have some guarantee of a state program, that would be very helpful.
And Dr. Maxey, just from your perspective, is there things that you need from the GME board, or how can we partner on this better? Or do you have the ability to move forward with that further investigation?
Yeah. We would be happy to support the GME board. We have a ton of data and resources that are already public and available. So I think it would probably be a great first step for the board, and maybe that's another discussion and presentation, is an overview of all of the actual physician workforce, already practicing workforce data that are accessible and available to the board. We work with agencies, executive branch agencies, commissions, and councils on an ad hoc basis when there is a need for a deep dive investigation. So if the GME board would like a very deep, detailed analysis, we would be happy to support and discuss that. Our resources through the Department of Health are limited. So when we work with other agencies or commission, we generally do have to have some resources to do very targeted analyses.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Well, we really appreciate your being here today and the presentation, and yeah, it's very insightful, and hope to continue the conversation for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
A good segue into our next topic. I think, it was a very interesting legislative session, very many challenges. I think there was a lot of work done to try to do a fair amount of advocacy where we could within scope. We wanted some of the board members, appreciate any board member who was trying to get out there. Julie Reed from the ISMA was a great partner in trying to help open doors and get us into certain rooms. Dr. Knight and I had an opportunity to present at a rural caucus, and try to advocate for GME funding. And there were other conversations happening. It was just, as we spoke about, just a really challenging session. So I'd like to turn it over to to Greg and Lucas to talk a little bit about the overall legislative session, the impact on us, and then, some budget updates as we start to think about awarding these grants moving forward and how we're going to handle some of the constraints we are facing. So, Greg, yeah.
Thank you, Chair Hurd and members of the board. I'm going to speak briefly about the budget. I know that most, if not everyone in the room is pretty familiar with the economic climate in which we are currently in. So just wanted to provide a little bit of commentary, allow time for questions if there are any, and then hand it over to Lucas to kind of set the stage for the presentation about the budget that he's going to give. So the General Assembly did adjourn sine die in the early morning hours of April 25th, finishing a few days early for what is statutorily mandated on April 29th. The budget bill, I think there are a lot of people holding their breath that things might with the revenue forecast on April 16th, be positive and allow for some wiggle room and other things during the last few weeks of session. That did not happen, and so the forecast was quite a bit different even than what we saw during the previous one, which occurred in December of 2024. So it was known that the revenue would flatline towards the end of the 2025-27 biennium. What we saw was that being a little bit more pronounced, and then actually some of that occurring in the fiscal year in which we are currently in, fiscal year 25. So someone a minute ago mentioned the over $2 billion shortfall. About 400 million of that is in the current fiscal year, and then it's about $1 billion during fiscal years 26 and 27. So I want to give credit to Governor Braun and his team and the Indiana General Assembly for navigating, the challenges of that. And really the approach that was taken falls into three different buckets. So one, a tobacco and cigarette tax was introduced, which is projected to generate about $800 million over the course of the next biennium. Second to that is that the General Assembly did responsibly dip into Indiana's reserves. So we're fortunate that we do have had fiscal responsibility for quite some time and had that available. And then the third prong is cuts that were made throughout most of state government. So most state agencies saw at least a 5% operating reduction. Programs, across the board also saw it as well. So I do want to highlight while the result maybe isn't exactly what the board was pursuing as we entered the budget year. I think it is a testament to the return on investment and strong work that has been done since this body's inception in 2015. And so having funding $7 million across each year of the upcoming biennium is a success, even though it may not seem that way to be celebrated. So funding does remain flat from the last biennium, but yeah, I'll kind of pause there and just see if there are any questions, but wanted to provide kind of that holistic outlook before Lucas starts getting into things with a bit more detail.
Well, hearing none.
Sorry, has there been any discussion internally around looking at opportunities to amplify the state funds through federal matching grants through Medicaid? We talked a little bit about that in January. I know that the legislature eclipsed everything over the last couple of months, but again, other states are doing that very effectively to multiply the amount the state's investing. Has there been any discussion with Medicaid about that?
No discussion that I'm aware of. Dr. Knight, I think that option still could be on the table. However, I do want to point out there was kind of an omnibus fiscal integrity and contract accountability bill, Senate Rolled Act 5, which got passed. One of the provisions, there are about 8 of them in the bill, focus on federal funding requests. And so depending on the nature of what would be entailed in that request, there are some additional steps now that are needed. Namely, if a state match is required to participate in federal funds, a permanent FTE, employees are added or other conditions, that the state would be expected to meet. There are quarterly reports now that go to the state budget committee. And so if one of those, three kick in, it would be, something in which the state budget committee would have to review that report before anything could be pursued. So.
Yeah, I'd just be interested in what next steps are to initiate the process with Medicaid. My understanding is that for other states, it occurs at the Medicaid level, that the state funding goes to Medicaid, then it goes through interdepartmental transfer through the feds, comes back, and then it's distributed from Medicaid, would then be distributed to this board to go out as grants. But it sounds like the Office of Medicaid has to sort of initiate that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that there's some layers and complexities that we're glad to do a little bit of research on, but I think, you know, with our partners at the Department of Health and, you know, Secretary Rowe and his team overseeing Medicaid, it would be a process that would, you know, obviously not just include the commission, but definitely, I think, could get some intelligence on that and just detail what the steps would be, who the players would be involved in that, and what possible, you know, routes would be for pursuing that.
Great.
Is that something that hospital systems have any ability to explore? Like, who does that exploration and figure that out?
I think it's the Office of Medicaid,
That's
from
what I-
what we heard from talking to other states who've done it, right? So I think if, yeah, either Lucas or Greg or whoever you think is appropriate could just even, I guess, open up the conversation. Is it other states seem to be doing this? And is this something or not that we could have, potentially have as a vehicle to
Yeah,
get
because if
additional
the
funding?
state's saying we're only gonna put 7 million in, it's a lot. But if the state's saying, you know, that they're already doing 7 million, so this potentially wouldn't cost any more than the 7 million.
Sure.
But it could come back. It sounds like most states are getting 2 to 3 times back from the feds. Because this is a question that I've been asked a couple of times when I've done presentations outside of Indiana about what we're doing on the GB board. They're saying, ooh, and how much are you getting from federal matching funds for this? Because it qualifies for that. And my answer is always zero right now.
The Hospital Association, House Bill 1004 had language that was kept in it that related to moving from what is the hospital assessment fee now, which creates a match, 3-1 feds to a state directed payment program, which was going to even bring more dramatically more, 800 million more in matching funds at the Fed level. They are supposed to be working with Minstrel as of yesterday to at least get a timeline on what that would look like. And I think that's where you start. I think you start there because the Hospital Association and the hospitals across the state of Indiana want to at least have that included. As much as it felt like it was taken, that's the one thing we really needed to have in there that allowed for more federal match. There's some anxiety over the Trump administration and how much of that match is going to be there at the end of the day, through the end of the year, because of the desire to take some of those funds and allow them to fund the permanent tax cuts. But there's still, regardless of what they do at that stage, there are still significant federal match monies that we tap into, both at the hospital level and at the GME level. And I think you're absolutely right. We need to make sure that as Metro is working on the hospital federal match, state directed payment program, the portion of that allows us to do the same thing at the GME level. It's going to be absolutely necessary. So it is.
And I recognize as we sit here today, we have $7 million to be here for the next 2 years. So that's what we need to focus on, what we do that. But at the same time, I don't think but I sort of took away from this most recent session is no matter how much legislators like this, because everybody we talked to loved it. At the end, we didn't get any more. At least we didn't lose any, but we didn't get more. So I don't think we can assume 2 years from now, we're going to get more. When the budget comes around from, get more from the state. So the question is, how do we maximize this? How do we maximize this through federal opportunities?
Yeah.
So.
Okay, great. Dive on in. To start, just a review from last July, it's the last, application voting, the board carries over $11,525, in unencumbered funds. So really captured cash until the second appropriation hits. This is a review on the left-hand side. I think a nice common denominator to think about the programs is the annual expense, the single year expense. Because, we do deal with the variable of, is it a 3 or a 5-year program? So just to kind of set a level playing field. You'll see 1 feasibility study, 2 program development grants, and 8 residency expansions were approved in 2024. The only outlier on this slide, you'll see each of those expansion grants were approved at a 2-year term, except for Marion Health. That was voted on earlier. Originally, they applied for program development, and the board decided they were more in fact residency expansion. So that program was approved for 3 years. So that's the one difference you'll see on this slide. So just some context. These are the annual expenses that you see. On the left-hand side, you'll see the average for these 8 grants. It's around $311,000. An important thing to consider is that, this is just for last year's grants that were approved. If you were to look at all of the residency expansion grants that were approved, the cost comes down to more around $275,000 average, right? So I think a big part of that is the internal medicine programs that were approved, larger rosters, larger PG-wide classes. So that's a big driver of that. And then, something else to consider, there are 4 programs that are currently receiving residency expansion funds that did not reapply for last year. So those are still involved with GMED, but they're just not showing up in this graphic. And then the other part of that is that Dr. Choi shared with us last time. There are 2 IU programs that are on track to apply for these applications in July of next year, 2026. So they've been delayed for 1 year. So when we look at, not this fiscal year, but upcoming, there's another 6 or so programs that could appear. That might change that average. Any questions about this slide? This is pretty baseline, but make sure we're on the same page. Okay. So what funds will we begin with come July 1st? That $11,000 carries over. We will receive an appropriation of $7 million. The finance department here at the commission recommends, reserving $100,000 for staff expenses. That might be supplies, salary, things like that internally at the commission, which will leave the board with $6,911,525 to use between July 1st and June 30, 2026. Right. So an important thing to consider, the feasibility and program development grants that are discussed today will not be signed until July 1st. Dr. Knight.
So, all of the previously awarded grants, all that money's been encumbered and is already outside of this. So this $7 million is truly new money to use.
Okay, correct. Yes. So, kind of looking back at the last 10 years or so, the board has reached a point of maturation. It's reached its 1 decade since inception. A lot of great work has happened in terms of outreach, networking, and, ensuring that there is still a bias for action in our state for this workforce shortage. As Greg shared, the appropriation will remain flat from previous years. And so kind of looking at what will the discussion in July look at, as well as going into, next spring, I would anticipate receiving at least 1 more feasibility study application and at least 1 more program development grant application. If we reached out to within the last month that those would be coming. So something to factor in.
I would drop that down. 75 million is pretty aggressive for a feasibility.
I was gonna volunteer to be the.
They had a really good application. Well, thanks for pointing that out. God, that would be kind of crazy, huh? 75,000. So the board, if they were to approve a program development grant and a feasibility grant, which might be the grants we discussed today, there would be $6,336,525 to use for residency expansion. So that's kind of the number to remember, 6.3 million. And so I think, part of the reason why I brought up that annual expense is to kind of how can we break that down if we were to use last year's average around $300,000 per program per year. This would fund about 20 years, individual years, right? If we're working on $7 million. I think this just gives us an idea of which specialties the board would want to focus. Is it a 3-year program or a 5-year program? And what can the board realistically, support and fund with guarantees? So, that is kind of, a high level of our budget review. I'm happy to take any questions.
This is unclear to me, but.
Yeah.
We funded 2 years for a group of them. Do we also eventually need to get back and fund that 3rd year out of this money?
So there was a clause in that grant or the contracts that said, if sufficient funding were provided in the upcoming biennium, those contracts would be amended. Judging by this amount, we would not edit those contracts. We wouldn't make any amendments. So they would stay 2 years.
But we could choose to make them a little more full at 3 years and use some of this.
Staff would recommend amending those contracts.
So they would need to apply to get
Correct.
additional.
Correct. And yeah, I am anticipating the applicants from last July to apply again this upcoming July. I've been in contact with each of them. My understanding is that that's the plan.
And I think what Dr. Sharp is asking is, are we funding to continue what we sort of have funded last time? Or are we just like doing the new cycle of the next upcoming class of these same programs? That's what I'm trying to discern.
As I've gone.
Right,
through
is
this
that the
forecast-
question you're
I think
asking?
so,
Yeah.
yeah.
As I've gone through this forecast, I've gone with the approach of the latter, starting new with the.
Starting new, so some people, so they would have some unfunded years.
Yeah, for those programs,
So once we did the 2 years up.
one has 2 year, several years not funded. But yeah, that's correct.
But they could apply to get that 3rd year funded.
No,
No.
no.
It would be for a
saying
new class.
Start over for the upcoming class that's coming, and you're gonna have to deal with the gap in that subsequent years of those programs, if I'm understanding correct.
Those sponsoring institutions. do.
They knew that,
It's not, it's not.
yeah, but it's sort of the first time we've been unable to fully fulfill the,
That verbiage was explicit in the communications when those contracts were signed. So
And-
there are no surprises with this.
yeah. But we were hoping we would have had more, and then we could fill it and, make them whole. And the reality is we can't, because with all the upcoming expansion grants we expect in July, we're gonna be starting over, and we're not even gonna have enough for that.
We don't expect having enough for those that we're expecting.
And not if these other new programs come along, right?
Correct, not to sponsor all of those programs for the full term. If you were to go back and look at these programs and improve, follow that same model last year, it would come out to a little above 7 million. Right, so. Now, I think a big part of this discussion today is, part of what the Bowen Center brought forth is which specialties are a priority for the workforce shortage in Indiana right now. And so that's kind of why I want to bring us to that overall, the program has around 20 individual years of funding that they can use. So whether that's a 5-year program, you do 4 5-year programs, or you did however many 3-year programs. That is kind of the area staff would recommend.
Yeah, and I think, it kind of gets to what I see as a fork in the road, like in July. If either we try to couple, what we sort of band-aided it last year, I'll call it, but this 2-year approach, maybe we only would be able to do 1 year, or I don't even know what. Or we actually start using the scoring rubric as the way to discern who's getting which funds, if we're gonna fully fund programs for the amount of time they're asking for. Is that, so that's kind of the fork in the road I think we're gonna be in July. Dr. Shockley?
We also choose to reduce the yearly amount that we give. It's so take that, what would have been 2 years to 3 years and say, okay, you're just getting a smaller amount. We'll fund you 3 years, but it's effectively a smaller amount so that there's maybe not, oh, you're funded year 1, 2, 3, boom, nothing. I don't say we just have less.
And I just want to,
That's tough for smaller.
And I want to keep it in the discussion.
But
that-
isn't it really tough for the smaller hospitals to get funded nothing? That sounds
Both.
really awful.
Because the funded nothing results in a lot of reduction in program. So
Right.
I think the dialogue's gonna end up being on if the legislature decided 7 million is all you get. I don't know how you grow programs and maintain the existing ones. So you could grow new programs by cutting this in half or by cutting it to zero for the existing ones. They're gonna drop. And you're gonna add new somewhere else. It's a net wash.
But
It
then
doesn't
they're
help.
gonna drop in a few years
And
too.
they'll do the exact same
So
thing.
that's-
I mean, I think.
Well, yeah, I think,
I mean,
I mean, and it's,
you know-
we don't know, right? I mean, we don't know if programs will truly close based on losing this grant money. We don't, that's a hypothesis, right? I mean, they may, the sponsoring institutions may see the investment as worthwhile. That's one possibility. The other possibility is some programs do close if we started out funding. I mean, this is tough. We have limited resources, but we're gonna have to, as a board, come up with the best, fairest, best use of the funds that we think is our responsibility and our ability to serve, but there's gonna be some tough, July is gonna be, last July was tough, this July is super tough.
So I guess I'm just trying to make sure I'm thinking about this right. Shouldn't we decide whether we actually develop new programs or just support the ones we have? Is that a decision we need to make?
Driver.
Like, are we really, like, if we took how much are we asking for this go around 650,000?
Well,
Something? Would that be better used?
but I guess with open RFPs, we have to allow people to apply and we have scoring criteria. I don't know if we can make that
Do we have to
decision.
continue to
What was
accept?
what was the repeat the specifics of that question?
Well, I guess, like, if we have $7 million and it takes $7 million to support all of the programs that you guys have already opened, or we have already opened, so, then should we not be entertaining new development grants and new
We
feasibility? studies?
close, but yeah, I guess we could make a decision to close the RFP for new.
This
At some
is,
point, we're not gonna have enough money.
this is part of the discussion.
We're gonna open up a program. That's it, make it.
Yeah, that's your guarantee.
Important.
It was never the intention to fund these programs in perpetuity.
Right.
It
Well, we
was
talked about that,
only-
but-
Yes, we do, right. And I think we're also seeing the realities of what health systems are facing now. Which maybe they always were, but it's more intense, I think, right now, that if you take away this much grant funding for the program, that there is a risk of closure, and then we risked all this investment, and then it's de-escalating the pipeline. That's, I think, what people are concerned about, but your point is fair, Dr. Gepke. It was not the intention at the beginning to have these in perpetuity, and we had early discussions about this philosophically and how long, and if we had enough funds, we decided, yes, we would fund them in perpetuity, but now we're at the point we do not have.
And I worry, like, for a system like mine, we can set up new programs, we've proven that, but, my system, if I said, okay, we'll have funding to set it up for 2 years, and then maybe 2 years of expansion, and then we're gonna have to figure it out, I don't think that they would approve it for my hospitals.
So, yeah,
It would let me open a new.
right,
program. Yeah.
right, right,
I think that's the frustration at the legislative level for us to be able to make a decision as to, okay, we're gonna shut some down, so the older ones, because it was never meant to be in perpetuity. And we're gonna add new ones, the impact. What we've done then is basically bail out the legislature by saying, okay, I'm gonna give you 7 million, they'll figure a way. And they'll figure a way to continue, this board, hospitals, figure a way to continue to grow residency programs in the future on the same numbers that they gave us 4 or 5 years ago. That seems ridiculous. That seems blatantly wrong. And the reality is that if we continue to do that, then we've allowed the legislature to basically drive us into a hole. And they still get to brag up.
Yeah.
They still get to brag up that they've grown programs in the state of Indiana. I just don't think it's right. I think question's right. I think the decision has to be made as to, are you willing to continue to grow programs knowing that the budget has not been expanded? Or are you going to say, because this is all you gave us, we will continue with the number of programs that we have now, not add additional ones until such time as the budget increases? I think you just have to decide. I don't know which is right.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, when I first came on, I was kind of thinking, well, why are we funding this for so long? And right now after being in my job for a year and a half, actually, I feel like the programs that we're funding right now are actually pretty fragile. And until they've been around for 10, 15 years, every dollar counts. And
Leave it beyond that, actually.
probably, yeah, probably so. But seeing my programs that are only 5 years old have been funded through this, we still need really strong faculty development. We're not there yet. We still need a lot of inputs that, it's just not enough. And so 5 years, not enough. So what's the ideal amount of time? I can't answer that question, but I'm personally a little reluctant to transition people out completely, at least, whether it be decrease funds or whatever, but I would be really reluctant to transition
out existing programs at the expense of and that would be at the expense.
Right.
Of not offering new development when we see this massive data that shows we're like years behind other states, which is also a really hard thing to.
But they have money, like, don't have money to fix that problem. Like,
Yeah.
my hospital does not have money to fix that.
No, I hear. I hear.
None of them do.
Nobody does. Nobody does. Go ahead, Dr.
I
Knight.
guess I step back and look at the code, the Indiana code that formed this board, and the focus there is developing new programs. It doesn't talk about sustaining. And so I think that's a question that I have is state almost is our charge as a board to continue to look at development of new programs or support the programs. And ideally, again, it would be both. And if we got more money, we would do it help for a few years. If we could get that additional money, but
Well, and I think the climate's different than it was 10 years ago when that code was written. Too. I mean, at the time, I know from being on the board at the very early time, and Steve, maybe you could show the people on the virtual room, Lucas, but Dr. Becker, I think at that time, philosophically, it was very clear at the beginning of the board discussions that it was a startup process. That was our general gestalt. But, we always had this tension that we knew that was out there. But I think the environment and our job as a board to read the current environment for these GME programs is very different than it was 10 years ago. We're substantially different. What would you say, Steve? You were predating
Well,
me.
Trish, I actually think the original intent was to try to expand the state with 500 additional spots to get us close to the national average, which was what was required. And therefore, the original bill was written to get to 22 million a year to support 45,000 long-term for all the new programs long-term. That was the original goal. And of course, they only funded a 2-year period, at 3.5 million the first year. So I actually think the initial working group and intent was to be long-term funding. Now that's the decision that we're going to have to make right now. I think one thing, anyone applying for a development grant right now certainly has to understand that they can't rely on the 45,000. So I think the groups that have worked on scoring metrics, I think in general, we have felt the 500,000 development grant was a very important grant, probably the most important of the 3 that we do, because that's a time at which you're starting to build the program, you have no revenue coming in. Now, having started multiple programs, that is really true. That's a big hit on a hospital to take a jump and invest all that money in the first 2 years when they're getting no CMS revenue back. So, I think at the beginning, the goal was to add 500 spots in the state to get us near the national average. And that this would happen over a 10-year period. Now there's been other discussions at the board and new people have joined the board, and rightfully the question is, what should we do if we don't have enough money? Do we continue to fund, or do we start new programs and hope that other programs don't drop? Obviously, for somebody who has started and been involved with starting programs, and I know Jen and Rob would think the same way. It is a tough slog to get through that first 5-6 years. And even at that time, you're not fully solidified. My own personal feeling is, in some ways, we have to protect what's been built so far, because it would be horrible to lose programs and then have to start all over somewhere else and have a 5 to 8 year period to get to those being stable. But I think that's a discussion for July's meeting. One thing I would recommend, I would like to get the AAMC data and see exactly where we are, number of resident spots for the residencies we are willing to fund, so that we can at least get an idea if we've had impact. I do know that family medicine back 8-10 years was the only one that was above 25th percentile in our state among all the other ones. At that time, we had one psych residency in the whole state. So we need to look, after these multiple psychs have started, maybe that now is getting to where it might be sustainable for our numbers long term. So I think before we make a bunch of decisions in July, it would be nice to at least have that AAMC data, which should be reliable, of how many spots do we have in each of the specialties. And then obviously longer term, getting really good workforce development from the Bowen Center to try to make some longer term decisions about what the state needs. So I think the discussion is right on, that everyone, and I think everyone's point is good. We're in this position, we're just going to have to make the best decision that we can with the funds we're going to have.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Should the board decide to not approve the program development grant today, there are at least 4 program development grants that are on track to matriculate by 2027, pending no other delays, right? So there are still things happening and moving beyond what is discussed today.
Yeah.
So just something to consider.
Oh, that's a big factor. Those are people waiting in the wings, wanting to start up programs. And I'm also trying to think strategically. As a board, how do we, does one avenue versus another help us drive more impetus to get more funding? I don't know the answer to that, right? If we had to say, we have to close our program development grants because of lack of funding, would that create more urgency in the next biennium? That we need more funding so we can now start getting them, you know what I mean? How would that versus?
There's not money there though. We have 2 billion shortfall.
When
Not
they,
gonna do more.
Well,
when they apply for a new program grant, do they know that they may not get the expansion grant? Is that very clear to
I
them?
think, historically, every program has up to now, so I don't know that if they're talking to colleagues and they're trying to figure it out, they probably assume they're gonna get it. Because we haven't been explicit with saying. They're giving out message.
Part of it, the application be,
We may need to.
how are you going to fund this past, I know in the application, it talks about possible support.
Well, and I think it's also, we didn't really know, would we drop off these, because if you drop off the longstanding programs and you start to fund these, then there is the funding, right? And there would be, and use expansion funding for that. If you would say the program that's been around for 6, 7 years, we're gonna stop funding. There actually would be dollars for them. So we haven't been explicit yet because we haven't really made that. Oh,
Just one point,
yeah.
Madam Chair, the way in which these hospitals and qualified entities are applied is through the commission's RFP process, which we do for all of our grant agreements and contracts. Those clauses are laid down very explicitly now, you know, because of approvals, you know, the supply being sufficient to meet demand in the past. We can't influence, you know, one's perspective if they're thought, oh, you know, we're going to get this, but do want to just provide that clarity for the board that language is very clear throughout the RFP. But
Clear throughout the,
that it is a competitive process,
Yeah.
you know, for which they are applying and that all the.
Exactly.
They don't guarantee it. Yeah. We can't prevent assumptions, but that language is very clear and explicit. Yep.
And it's not,
Especially there were a couple of other development grants that were coming up through 20, like those are ones that we've already approved and funded. I didn't understand the
Correct.
context. Okay,
Yep.
so that's not money that we're.
they're new vote, they're not new votes, they're just gonna hit our,
They're ones we're expecting to become expansion grants because.
Oh, I see.
they've
Yeah,
been-
yeah, yeah.
they've
I
been
understood
through
that.
Program development grant there.
Right.
so that is one emergency medicine program, 2 family medicine, 1 internal medicine, and 1 psychiatry. So it's 5 that are set to matriculate by 2027.
okay, well, July is gonna be, a very complicated meeting, and we're gonna have to come to, so I think we're, you know, but I think but I wanted to make sure we laid this foundation out before we voted today on these 2 grants, because it does, you know, we could make some, I presume if we could table some things or we could make some decisions, but if we vote on these, we are taking out and they get approved, we're taking out 600,000 of the roughly of the 6 million or 6.9 million we have for the next 2 years. So that I just wanted to have that context in place. Angie.
So I agree. This is actually laying out the case for the advocacy or the educational work that needs to be done as to why we need more funding. If we cut existing grantees and continue to expand and fund new programs, then the legislators will have no incentive. We figured out we solved our problem, right? And so I would say we probably should use I mean, we need to go to them and say, this is the dilemma that we're in, you know, and make sure that, you know, they kind of, do we need to go back to what that core document was as far as our marching orders? Because we want to fulfill the obligation at hand, but I agree. We can fund new ones. And the last thing we want to do is open up the newspaper and see a bunch of residencies well-established, you know, in the community, start to close their doors. That makes no sense at all. My question is, what's been it, you know, I know you guys probably don't have this off the top of your head, but have we approved like 99% of the grant applications that have come through? Okay, so all these people that are currently planning are sort of, it's been historically almost, you know, a guarantee that you get the funding.
Yes, we have had the funding, so we have been able to award pretty much every grant. With some applications, we've sent them back for some clarifications or some,
We had a PMR.
oh yeah, maybe, it wasn't, but they weren't on, they didn't follow the RFP requirement that it was that specialty, because we never had PM&R on that. Yeah, but generally, we have, to your point, Angie, we've been able to approve almost everything.
So, I mean, I wonder even should there be some sort of statement issued by the office or the board to everybody that's in the process, just letting them know that the funding was not increased and putting them on notice, but also that's a document that can be shared with the legislators as well as we start to advocate.
Yeah, I want to add, Angie, I think that's a really good point. I think like for the development grants, those institutions need to know that at this point, they're probably not going to be 45,000. So, but they are actually in the launch pad to build the program. So they're going to make that decision right now that they're going forward with the program with the $500,000 startup grant. So in that way, that is a strong statement by that organization that they're willing to do this. So they're not going to count on the 45,000 to make it. Now, of course, the world can change in 2 years. Hospital revenues can fall through the, so we can't control those things. But I think it would be good to let people specifically know the situation the board's in and that we don't want them starting a residency expecting to have the 45,000 a spot to make it run.
Yeah. But, and I hear you, Steve, but with our current scoring rubric, it's not going to direct the funds that way. Our current scoring rubric takes away points for people for the programs that are more well established. And so if that's a decision, so we can't tell those programs in the current state, you can't apply. And if they are given the scoring rubric as we've set it up, they actually will get more points than the established programs. And so.
Right, but they can't be guaranteed. Nobody can be guaranteed. And unlike in the prior years, it was sort of a guarantee because there was plenty of money. So I'm just saying that whatever our scoring metrics is at the time we vote, that's what it is. But in reality, we need to let people, if they're applying for a development grant, it's not like it was 3 years ago where everybody was getting 45,000. It's fair to let those institutions know that. And that actually is part of the, the need that we have to raise funds from the state or somewhere else.
Yeah, great. Go ahead.
My other,
Go ahead, Angie.
well, my other question was, if we choose to decrease funding for the existing grantee, how much notice, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the timing of everything. How much notice would they have of the funding change?
It would be contingent upon when that decision was made by the board, Angie. So I didn't want to interrupt this really good conversation, but if there are substantive changes that the board desires to be made prior to July 1st, that would require a vote. For example, Dr. Becker, to your point with the $45,000 per slot, that I believe, Lucas can correct me if I'm wrong, is explicitly stated in the RFP. And so there would be some really quick updates, which we can do, but they would need to be made done at the board's direction. And so that would require a meeting vote on some of these different items. So I think Dr. Hearn, I was planning to bring that up, she mentioned it, with the scoring. I mean, that is the North Star in its present form. And so if there are changes, amendments that need produced on those, we're glad to take a look at those, but that would need to get turned around soon.
Yeah.
If unless.
Yeah. I mean, the other option is for us to try, this would be a path forward, is to live into our scoring rubric. We've had it for a long time. We just had a couple of meetings of our scoring subcommittee to refine it, make it very objective. And so what we could do is just live into that scoring rubric that we've made and then just recently refined and then see what happens in July, because the rubric will drive, we designed the rubric to drive what we thought we wanted as a board. We've agreed upon
To
it.
develop new programs and maybe support them in their.
Yeah, and to give,
And then.
and
Maybe that.
right, versus right now, trying to change our rubric again is a little bit of a panic approach. It's not, I understand we're feeling panicked because we're right here. But we could just live into it and then
Right.
see what happens. And then based on that, if we decide, we need to modify, we could. I mean, that is one down the road for the following, July, if we see, gosh, this had anticipate, I mean, we didn't expect it to fall like this, or we see that with because our RFP and our rubric, is what we're supposed to follow.
So the vision of this board was always to develop new programs,
That was, we put
Not-
priority on that.
not necessarily to support them.
I mean, ideally thought.
Steve said the vision was to start in support.
So both, it was to do both.
Right.
It was
Time to choose which ones.
It was,
I guess.
I think we've had discussions over the course of the board's tenure
Yeah,
that has led itself a little bit towards this fact that we knew it wouldn't be forever.
Yeah.
That's like not a tenable thing to think you just, have these grant funds forever and not, at some point they shift to newer programs that want to start up. We definitely discussed that a fair amount over the years, but I think ideally we've also wanted to understand that supporting a program longer than 5 years is ideal, and they do need this support infrastructure, so it's a both and.
Madam Chair.
Yes, we need to.
We
move
were to
forward.
edit or, make amendments to that RFP. Those applications are due by June 25th, Wednesday, June 25th. I would want those applicants to have at least 1 month with the RFP. So, the last deadline would be May 21st, Wednesday, May 21st. So it's just over 3 weeks. I guess under 3 weeks.
So I guess, the thing I think I need to gather from the board is, do we want to just like live into our current scoring that we've modified? Or do we want to try to huddle a work group in the next couple of weeks to do some modifications such that we could then pivot? And that would be a big change to do in a very short amount of time.
but when you say live into our current score, that means that some programs in July might not get.
Correct.
the
That would be
extension. Yeah. Gotcha.
Just to keep sight of the agenda, there are 3 proposed recommendations in the agenda today.
Yeah.
So this is an appropriate time to talk about
Yeah.
that language, but that is part of something that should be decided today.
Right, I do want to be, but I do want to get some feedback from the board about which direction to move in. If we want to just move forward with our current scoring rubric with the modifications that are about to be discussed from the scoring subcommittee, or if there's a desire to try to very quickly create another subcommittee to do a deep dive and make some different recommendations.
Would you like to vote on that?
Someone would need to make a motion to reconvene the subcommittee.
If that's that's sort of direction we want. If we would need a motion to, but do we want to vote on our opinion? We can just share our opinion. I mean, how many are in favor of living into our, can I just ask the group for their general, moving forward with our current rubric and living into that in the July meeting? Versus trying to create a very quick ad hoc group to make some modifications before the July meeting to our scoring rubric. Any in favor of that?
I like that idea better, but I don't know that it's, I mean, the question becomes, do you really have?
Okay,
Because I think you could address some things that are a priority in the state of Indiana for this group to say, okay, these are the ones we're trying to protect. As opposed to some that may have either deeper pockets or a safety net. But I think you got time.
Okay, yeah. Well, it seems like there's enough momentum to just like live into what we've done, and honestly, it's okay, then we'll see what the ramifications are, and then we'll be able to guide our board even better once we learn how those do shake out. I think it sounds like that's the direction we're gonna go. So why don't, if it's okay, for the sake of time, I know we're getting close to the end of our board meeting, Let's talk about the updates to the scoring rubric, but thank you for this robust discussion, because this is really hard stuff that we're facing
So-
right now.
Just to clarify, my understanding is the board will postpone the votes on feasibility and program development today.
No, I don't think so. I think we're just deciding that in July, we're gonna live with our current scoring rubric.
Okay.
That was the decision we made, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then we can still, move forward and vote on these.
Great. So, yeah, the recommendations, there's nothing new here. This has all been previously discussed. There it is. So this is the current residency expansion, scoring template. There are two areas for, evaluator discretion up to 20 points. The recommendations of the scoring subcommittee are to implement a tiered scoring system. See if I can make this bigger. So for involving a collaborative approach, taking that from 20 points possible down to 15 and just listing out what those components are. So the applicant can ultimately determine what that score is going to be prior to moving forward. So those eligible collaborations, area health education center, critical access hospital, a federally qualified health center, behavioral health provider, and other. And so that is still to leave some discretion up to the evaluator, if there's something that hasn't been discussed in that subcommittee, still opportunity for votes. So no major changes, just clarity.
And again, our subcommittee was just trying to make things much more objective, because some of these scores were like 20 points if you collaborate, and we wanted to provide a little more structure and objectivity to it.
Yep. So, hearing no questions, that is the first recommendation. The second recommendation, which it sounds like was in favor of everyone, was a 50-page limit on the applications. And so, that would be me working pretty closely with those applicants, just to ensure that they're not missing any key points of their application. But that's recommendation 2.
We love that one.
They'll love it too.
I think so.
Gotta be.
Small ponds.
And then 3, following that same vein for the first recommendation. So strength of application, just kind of listing out different components that would make a full, complete, strong application, including a faculty development plan, letter from medical staff leadership, letter from administrative leadership, and then some form of community support. Right, still a total points possible of 20. So those are the 3, the 3 recommendation areas. And so ultimately, a lot of this will be more formulaic versus this is what I feel.
Yeah, Dr. Schaffner.
Can I make a suggested slight correction? It says letter from the state legislature. I think the intent was state legislature, not,
Like board.
yes, your local legislature. It would be very hard to get a letter from.
Yeah.
The whole.
And the other scores remain the same, which are based on density of physicians in that area, based on years from inception of the program, and
Let's see.
one other.
We have it in the show.
Collaboration.
Yep. So you have the population to primary care ratio, the county ranking, collaborative approach, years since establishment.
Yeah.
And strength of application.
Yeah. Okay.
So. Okay, I'm happy to answer any questions about those recommendations.
And if there's no further questions, we'll take a motion to approve that.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of approving our updated scoring rubric as outlined? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that motion carries, and this will be our new rubrics effective with the next.
Yep, so this
Application.
will, I'll start working on edits to the RFP, at least with this. So we'll aim to have this published. We'll discuss the timeline on that, but yeah, we'll start making that scoring edit.
Thanks for all your help.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the folks on the scoring subcommittee as well for their effort. Okay, well, I want to keep us moving, get us, see if I can get us done on time. We're pretty darn close. So in the vein of what we just spoke about, I think we'll then move forward with scoring these grants because that's what we said, we just philosophically sort of agreed, like, let's just live into our funding and our scoring rubrics and our RFP process. And so we have 2 grants for consideration today. The first is a feasibility study that was sent in from, I think it's Beacon Health. Did I have that right? Beacon Health System up near South Bend. They were exploring multiple different possible GME programs and they've applied for the $75,000 grant and hopefully had a chance to review the application. Lucas, do you have scoring to share with the group?
Yes. So the state or the county ranking was awarded 20. The population to physician ratio were awarded 10 points. The average for the involving a collaborative approach was just under 18 points out of 25, right? And then the naive specialty, about that, comes out to just under 21 points. So the score for that, the feasibility grant is 68 out of 100 points.
Any questions or discussion about this grant application? Since we have adequate funds, the score won't really dictate, but we're just providing it for information. All right, if there's no discussion on this grant application, I'll entertain a motion to approve this feasibility grant for Beacon Health. Motion to approve. Okay, Dr. Choice, Dr. Shockley first, Dr. Choice second. All in favor of approving the feasibility study for Beacon, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Okay, the feasibility study for this system will be approved, so we can let them know. Thank you, Lucas.
Mhm.
Then, the second program, grant we have to approve today is a program development grant from Southwest for psychiatry, so the Southwest Consortium from Psychiatry. I assume we have a couple of folks who may need to recuse themselves, but wanted just run through the scoring and open up any discussion on that grant application, that question or discussion points people might want to share.
Okay.
Go ahead, Lucas.
Right, so this should be located in Vanderburgh County, so received full points, 20 points for the county ranking. The physician to population ratio received 10 points out of possible 25. This sheet that I'm showing you takes out the people who claimed a conflict of interest. So 19.5 points out of a possible 20 for a collaborative approach. And then 19 points out of 20 for strength of application. In the naive specialty, 16.5 out of 20. So this application received about 85 points out of a possible 105. Now, if the board is interested, if the scores of those who claimed the conflict of interest was included, it's less than a point of difference. So the board is pretty on page with these applications.
Yeah, go
I'll
ahead.
move to approve.
Wonderful.
Second.
All in favor of approving the Southwest Psychiatry grant, development grant, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, that also is approved, so good news, we got to share some good news programs for now. They were getting to share good news. All right, excellent. Okay, well, thank you. This was a complicated meeting and July will be maybe even more so. But I appreciate everyone's effort to do the right thing. This is hard stuff. All right, well, really thrilled that we've had our student members who've been a part of this board with us. It's just fantastic that I think it's such a great learning opportunity, first of all, that you all get to be a part of this board, just listen and reflect a little bit. So I'm going to read the resolutions for each of our student members. Let me put on my glasses. First is resolution for Eric Davis for his service to the Graduate Medical Education Board. whereas Indiana currently has a shortage of over 800, actually, these are the same. Let me, I don't read twice. Is that okay? Yeah. And also a resolution to recognize Kelly Pollack. So let me read this, yes. Whereas Indiana currently has a shortage of over 817 physicians. And whereas increasing the number of physicians, especially in rural and underserved area, improves the health and quality of life of Hoosier communities. And whereas the Graduate Medical Education Board was established in 2015 to expand graduate medical education in Indiana by funding new residency program slots at licensed hospitals and qualifying nonprofit organizations. And whereas the Graduate Medical Education Board is comprised of 10 gubernatorial appointees representing key public health organizations and associations throughout the state. And whereas Eric Davis has represented the Marian University Tom and Julie Wood College of Osteopathic Medicine as a student advisor of the Graduate Medical Education Board since 2023, and served the Graduate Medical Education Community and Indiana residents with distinction. And whereas Kelly Kolek has represented the Indiana University School of Medicine as a student advisor of the GME board since 2024 and served the Graduate Medical Education Community and Indiana residents with distinction. Now, there be resolved, the Graduate Medical Education Board expresses its deep appreciation to Kelly Kolek and Eric Davis as they conclude their terms of service and wish you both continued success. Next, there's a little bit, anything you want to say about your time on our board and what you
I'll start off. It has been an incredible learning opportunity. So thank you so much. I've had no idea the time, efforts, and funding it takes to start these programs. So it really has kind of altered my perspective a bit. Definitely, when you learn a little bit of something, you realize all that you don't know. And I think this has been a perfect fit for that. So thank you for having me here. I will be going to Mayo Clinic, Florida for my neurology residency. And just along with that, on theme with the board, I was really not surprised I knew about it, but during my application process, I'm going to apply in Indiana has IU, so incredible program, 8-10 spots. And then you look at Ohio, Illinois, they all have 30, 40 plus neurology positions. So it was just very startling to see, kind of what the board was tackling like right in front of me. So very thankful for this. Thank you all.
Yeah, that's good too.
Yeah, I am trained here from here, so I do intend to go to Florida for a bit, as Dr. Choi said, but probably I wouldn't be surprised if I came back. So I'm kind of helping with that. The thing that doesn't show is easily let it out out there.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Congratulations. Here.
I'm in a similar position, so I matched the Advocate Christ Medical Center in Oakland, the Chicago surrounding area for internal medicine. I also have a family here, so the Indiana, like you said, Dr. Choi, come back is very real. But that being said, I'm excited to carry on here. So I wanted to thank the board for, allowing us to have this opportunity. I went all over Indiana for my medical rotations there in the fourth year, and I got to spend one month in the program that's funded by the board. And so it was really neat to kind of see those areas and where the board is improved, medical access to Hoosiers. So thanks to the board, thank you to Dr. Knight and to Marian University for allowing me to have this position.
Yeah. Well, we wish you both much success, and we do hope we lure you back. And we are so excited that I think both Dr. Knight and Dr. Choi have made recommendations for us to have new student members that'll join us at our next meeting. So, your shoes will be filled with others in your same position, and we're just thrilled for your connection to this board and what you get to do for your career. So, thank you. All right, I'm going to pivot now. I think if we got through all of our agenda items, any public testimony that anyone would want to share from the virtual or in the room?
And just to note, we received some public testimony following the previous meeting. Board members should have all received an email about that, and it's also in your packet, your agenda packet, in case you'd like to look at it. But
yeah, there was a fellow who had written us a letter and
Yep.
shared a little bit of their recommendations. I thought that was nice to see them taking an interest in our board. All right. Well, this was a very full meeting. Look forward to our meeting in July and really just seeing the fruits of our work and how it all plays out. And just appreciate everyone's engagement today. So we'll see you all. So a motion to move, adjourn our meeting today. I think there's no opposition to that. All right. Meeting adjourned, and we will see you all in three months in July.